Testing, testing, testing. Cody, we're on?
Yes, sir. We are good to go.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Leadership Institute's February Wednesday Wakeup Club breakfast. We live in interesting times, and conservatives, I think, are always fair, and we give credit where credit is due. And I think that today would be an appropriate time to give credit to former Vice President Al Gore, who has predicted for decades that we would be boiling hot today. I encourage you to live tweet today's breakfast. The hashtag is there on the screen. Last year, 2025, your Leadership Institute trained 27,118 conservatives and conducted 1,916 individual training events. Since 1979, the Institute has trained more than 359,959 activist students and leaders. The Institute has already scheduled 320 individual training events for this year, and there will be, of course, many more. You have before you a sheet listing our schedule for the upcoming month. I urge you to take a moment to review these schools and consider attending one or sending friends to one of our trainings. And if you're watching online, please visit our website at leadershipinstitute.org/training to see upcoming online and in-person trainings. My pleasure now to present to you Devarian Lambert. He's our donor engagement intern currently at the Leadership Institute. He's also a precinct chair and a conservative grassroots leader based in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. He currently serves as the South Central Regional Lead for TPUSA RISE, where he oversees activist training, leadership development, and community engagement across Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana. His work focuses on building durable grassroots infrastructure and advancing constitutional conservative principles through local political involvement. Darian also looks forward to learning directly while here from experienced professionals, sharpening his ability to engage and mobilize communities and growing as a leader who can advocate effectively for the principles he believes in. In his free time, he enjoys staying active. He likes working out, hiking, fishing, camping, traveling, attending conferences and events, listening to podcasts, reading, having meaningful conversations that challenge his thinking and help him grow personally and professionally. Would you come up, please, and offer an invocation and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? It's on. I believe. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm going to be doing our prayer and our Pledge of Allegiance. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us as we forgive our trespassers, and those who forgive us who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Can we all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Now I'm introduce Lee Vlasblom, who will give our program's report. Lee is the director of our school board leadership program. She has built her career around education and governance. She began her professional work at the U.S. Department of Education, where she saw firsthand that only strong leadership shapes successful schools. She then spent more than a decade as an elementary school teacher in both rural Kentucky and in Fairfax County, Virginia, which sure isn't rural. Focusing on curriculum development, community engagement, and mentoring other educators. Lee later returned to civic and political leadership, including work on Senator Elizabeth Dole's campaign and years of service on local boards and community organizations in Pennsylvania. She also ran for and served in the Central Bucks School Board in Pennsylvania, where she held leadership roles and worked on finance, operations, and policy. Today, Lee is committed to helping train and equip conservative leaders to reclaim their communities and to strengthen schools. Please come up.
Thank you, Gordon.
Just a minute. I'll be, okay.
I would know how to use the microphone. So good morning. I'm the director of an amazing program, School Board Leaders program, and I just quickly want to share some amazing impact that we have been blessed to have this year, thanks to the generosity of our wonderful donors and for Morton's vision to know that school boards and school districts really are where education reform begins. And we're seeing a lot of it happening currently. We have had the honor of training 737 school board members. Those are people seated in positions that do make policy and make decisions that impact students on a daily basis. Over 8 million students have been impacted by the school board members that we have had the honor of training. So this is an opportunity where our generous donors really do have an impact on children's lives. So thank you. And then we have also had the pleasure of 1,677 grads through our activism, our school board members, and candidates, because if you don't win, you don't govern. So I thank my team and for Morton with allowing us this opportunity to contribute. We are having, very quickly, I want to tell you about a fun project. So we are working alongside a couple of other organizations, School Board Member Alliance of Virginia, and the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. And we are putting on a webinar series for the year, which will look at the past, the present, and the future. And how does civics education really impact what we're seeing today in our environment, and in some cases, the lack of civic education. And Reagan, and I don't want to butcher the quote, but said freedom was never more than just one generation away from extinction. So it's not a given. And he knew it, and we're seeing it currently. So this is going to be a journey through America's past, present, and future. We're going to have every month, the last Wednesday at 7 p.m., we will do different topics. I have them listed here. So please sign up, put the Zoom link in your calendar each month, and join us. And if you miss one of the months, we just completed the first one, and it was amazing. And you can watch it on demand. We are also going to be doing an in-person event here at headquarters, and we will be also collaborating and working alongside with with other organizations. And so we have a tentative schedule, and so mark your calendars for June 12th and 13th. And if you're in the area, the Victims of Communism Museum will be hosting a reception. And then the next 2 days will be here really hearing from some dynamic speakers. And if you know of a great organization or someone that you would like that might be interested in being a part of this, also please let me know. So your QR codes are right here. Please take some time to register, and if you'd like any additional information, just let me know. But we're excited about celebrating America, and it's kind of, you're starting to feel the energy, and so we really wanted to be a part of that. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day. And I will turn it over to an exciting speaker. I know Morton.
Thank you for that report. And now to introduce our spectacularly wonderful featured speaker, I'm presenting to you Caden Perkins, the Vincent Flynn Intern for Development Operations here at the Leadership Institute. Originally from Flatwoods, West Virginia, and is currently attending West Virginia University, where he's studying political science. He's involved in student government at his university and is serving as a campaign manager for a candidate who is running this year for the West Virginia House of Delegates. Caden has first-hand experience in the legislative process, having served as the House and Senate page in the West Virginia State Legislature and as a United States Senate page for former Senator Joe Manchin. Through this role, he spent 4 months living in D.C. and working in the U.S. Senate. In his free time, Caden enjoys spending time outdoors in West Virginia and traveling through the state and across the country. He's excited for this opportunity at the Leadership Institute to help train the next generation of leaders. Come on up and introduce our good friend who's our featured speaker today.
Well, good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is enjoying their breakfast. So my name is Caden, and I have the distinct honor of introducing our guest speaker today. Peggy Grande was executive assistant to President Ronald Reagan from 1989 to 1999 after he left the White House. She is author of the book, The President Will See You Now, My Stories and Lessons from Ronald Reagan's Final Years, and is currently working on a second book about Ronald Reagan's mother called Raising Reagan, How Nelle Reagan and the Midwest Shaped the Man Who Changed the World. Peggy has served as a presidential appointee during both Trump administrations and is currently placed at the National Archives working on Freedom 250 initiatives. She considers it the honor of a lifetime to have worked for 2 presidents of the United States during 3 different eras and in both support and strategic roles. Prior to re-entering government service, Peggy was an international keynote speaker, TV and radio commentator, and widely published opinion writer in the US, UK, Australia, and the Middle East. Peggy serves on the board of Pepperdine University's School of Public Policy and is GOPAC's board of Center for American Ideas. Peggy is a graduate of Pepperdine University, mother of 4 grown children, and has 2 granddaughters. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to our guest speaker, Peggy Grande.
Well, thank you and good morning. And I hope everybody saw the great Reagan buttons on the way in. I'm wearing my vintage 1980 Reagan watch today. Why are we celebrating Reagan today? Well, if you don't know, his birthday is February 6th. So February 6th, 1911, Ronald Reagan was born. Changed our nation and changed the world forever. And I certainly consider myself to be one of the luckiest women in the world to have had a front row seat to history and to learn from and about this man for the 10 years I served him. So we're going to talk a little bit today about how he led, how he lived, and the legacy that he left behind. And I'll be happy to take some questions at the end if anybody has some questions, so you can be thinking of those. But I first wanted to say thank you to Leadership Institute, to Morton, who I've known for a very long time. I am proud to serve as one of the guest faculty for some of the school trainings that they do, the Youth Leadership School. And, you know, when I think of all the great organizations in Washington, it's really always a pleasure to be affiliated with Leadership Institute because it's really the front lines. It's where, you know, the words hit the pavement and we train people who go out and are change makers and difference makers. And so thank you to Morton for leading this great organization for so many years and for inviting me to be part part of it, not only today, but I really appreciate the invitation to Palm Beach School in a couple of weeks, because as a Southern Californian, I'm getting out of DC and I'm gonna go find some warmer weather for the weekend and teach for Leadership Institute. But thank you, Morton, and thank you for everybody taking time to be here today. Well, let's get to our favorite subject that we're here to talk about, Ronald Reagan. I usually get two questions about Ronald Reagan. One, how on earth did you get that job? And two, what was he really like? So hopefully I can cover both of those for you today. As far as how I got that job, this is a really poorly preserved picture, but this is me in 1975. We came on a family road trip, loaded up the station wagon, drove from Southern California all the way to Washington, D.C., in 1975. Now, for those of you who remember the bicentennial, that happened in 1976. My dad, who was very practical, he said, well, we don't want to go when all the crowds are there, and so I think we should load up in the station wagon, drive cross country, and go in 1975. So in 1975, I was here as a young child for the first time in Washington, D.C., and we got to see everything closed and under construction for the 1976 bicentennial. But my mother remembers very distinctly, we were standing in front of the White House and I'm watching all these people dressed up, scurrying in and out of the White House. And I turned to her and I said, I wonder what you have to do to work here. And I always had a love of history, of politics. It probably came from my flag-waving grandmother, who always had the equivalent of C-SPAN on and was always watching things and always talking about current events. And my parents weren't so involved, but my grandmother really was, and a flag-waving patriot. And so I attribute a lot of my love of politics and government in this country to her. But what is a woman in Southern California ever going to have to do with politics? So being very practical, I chose to go to Pepperdine and be a communications major. Who was in the White House when I was in college? Ronald Reagan. So I never imagined that that love of history would take me on this journey to the White House eventually myself, with a little detour in politics for 10 years in Southern California. So what happened is I went to Pepperdine, I studied communications. Ronald Reagan was in office, so of course as the great communicator, I studied everything he wrote or did. But again, what were the chances that I was going to go into politics? But life has a funny way of opening doors for you. So my senior year at Pepperdine, Ronald Reagan leaves the White House. He comes to Southern California to open his post-presidency office. My dad raised me to believe that somebody's got to have the job you want, and it might as well be you. So when Reagan comes to Southern California, I take a chance and I write a letter on an old typewriter, lick a stamp and seal an envelope and mail it off to the office of Ronald Reagan, never even expecting to hear from them. One day I'm standing in my dorm room, the phone rings, pick it up. A lot of people in the room don't remember the phones that you actually have to stand there attached to the cord by the desk. And I'll never forget being invited to come into the office of Ronald Reagan for an interview. Most exciting moment of my life. At the time I was working for Nordstrom, so what I was gonna wear to the interview, no problem, check. Everything else, I had no idea, because I was raised in Southern California to a family of educators. They weren't politically connected, we weren't of the donor class, and this was a completely foreign world. But I knew if I stepped foot on that floor, it would be the most exciting day of my life, regardless of what happened. And I would look good, wearing my Nordstrom vest. So I went to this interview, and I'm going to read from my book what happened, because it just captures it in a way that I probably can't. So this interview I thought went pretty well. And at the end of it, the woman offered to take me to the front, and she asked me to wait for a minute until she brought me parking validations. And in my mind, I'm thinking, thank goodness, because when I saw the prices pulling into these LA parking garages, I'm thinking, I'm a starving college student. I don't even think I have enough money to get out of the garage after my interview. So I'm waiting in the front of the office, waiting for her to bring me the parking validations, and I'll read you what happened. So waiting for her in the lobby felt almost like a dream state. It was so foreign to anything I had ever done or experienced, and yet somehow felt strangely familiar, as if this was all meant to be. The door nearest me suddenly swung open, and the 4 Secret Service agents in suits and ties with earpieces, radios, and guns holstered under their coats walked hurriedly toward me. Did they know who I was? Did they know what I was doing there? Were they going to shoot me? Arrest me? And then behind the two lead agents, I saw two older gentlemen in golf attire. Wait, was it? Could it possibly be? It was the president, Ronald Reagan, and his golf buddy, Walter Annenberg. I don't know why in all my interview prep and planning, it had never occurred to me that I might actually meet Ronald Reagan in the office of Ronald Reagan. And I panicked, and I didn't know what to do. So I thought about what I would do if the flag was passing by. So I stood up straight, placed my hand over my heart, pretty embarrassing, and didn't even look at him, just staring nobly off into the distance in a very non-threatening way. I'm certain I looked completely ridiculous. But instead of walking past me, he walked right toward me. He looked me in the eye and extended his hand. I shook his hand and introduced myself. Well, hello, Peggy. It's nice to meet you, said the 40th President of the United States of America. I had imagined him as a 10-foot-tall giant. After all, he had been a movie star, a governor, and president of the United States. He had tackled communism head-on, fixed the domestic economy, and solved many of the world's problems. And yet here he was, an ordinary man, just over 6 feet tall. His hair in pictures appeared jet black, but up close I saw touches of gray, evidence of his 78 years. He was ruddy and rosy-cheeked, full of life, vitality, and happiness. His smile was more asymmetrical than I had ever noticed in photographs, and it was perfect in its imperfect way. And those eyes, a wonderful, bright, true blue, carrying so much joy. He was gone as quickly as he appeared, taking all the people, the energy, and the aura of power and importance with him. The office was suddenly eerily quiet. The woman who had interviewed me walked through that same door, grinning ear to ear, laughing after witnessing my salute. It's pretty incredible meeting him for the first time, isn't it? You should have warned me, I said, still trembling inside. No, it's much better this way. And though I felt I had horribly embarrassed myself, I had to agree. She then handed me the parking validation stickers and said, I was going to wait until tomorrow to call you and leave you hanging in suspense for a while. But I already know we want you to work here with us. Can you start on Monday? Yes, I can. So I held it all together until I was outside the building. I didn't know whether to shout for joy, cry, or drop to my knees in prayers of thanksgiving. I was so overwhelmed by all that had just happened that I started laughing out loud. The preposterousness of it all. Me, him, this office, Fox Plaza, Avenue of the Stars. We met, he shook my hand, and now I work for him? I didn't have any idea what Monday would hold, but I knew with confidence that my life would never be the same after that day. And in fact, it had already changed. So that's my experience meeting Ronald Reagan for the first time. Thankfully, from that embarrassing moment, I tried to not embarrass myself as much in the future, but just never imagined that from there I would be hired on the spot. I worked as an intern for a semester as I graduated college, and then as soon as I graduated college, I was hired to work full-time. I actually took over the role that the woman who had interviewed me did, running the internship program and being the executive assistant to the chief of staff there in the office. And then after a year or two, Ronald Reagan's longtime executive assistant he had since before he was governor, retired, and they asked me to take that role. So you certainly don't say no to a job opportunity like that. I was 6 months pregnant with my first baby. I wasn't quite sure how it was all going to work out, but in God's perfect plan and timing, I was able to stay there for 10 years, serving this incredible man, had 3 of my 4 children while I was working for him. You may see a couple pictures of them in here. Shameless mom. I got to do a plug for my kids. But what an incredible decade sitting outside this man's office. You know, this book, I always thought I would never write a book. And I was approached to write it, and I thought, it just doesn't seem right. With proximity comes this sensitivity and this privacy and protection. But somebody said to me, well, if there was a woman who sat outside Abraham Lincoln's office door for a decade, don't you think we would want to know what she saw, what she learned, what she observed, and don't you think she would owe it to history to tell us? So fast forward, here we are. The President Will See You Now, my stories and lessons from Ronald Reagan's final years. This picture that's on the cover, I actually snapped in his office one day. I walked in and it was as if the lighting was just perfect. And I said, Mr. President, you look especially handsome today. Do you mind if I take your picture? Well, all right. So I ran and got my camera, one of those old film cameras, snapped a picture, just never imagining it would grace the cover of a book, and that I would be so fortunate to be a steward of his story and be able to tell it and share it for so many years. So on to the second part. What was he really like? And we can laugh at the hairstyles and the fashions of the 1990s and 80s. Yeah, my kids are like, Mom, was there shoulder pads and everything? Yeah, pretty much. But what was he really like? Up close and personal, he was exactly who you thought and hoped he was. He was warm, he was charismatic, he was smart, he was funny, and very attentive and aware of the people around him. So traveling with him, he completely spoiled me back in my 20s, flying private aircraft. You know, now I fly commercial like everybody else and long for the days of traveling with Reagan. That was actually pre-TSA, so you would drive onto the tarmac and just get onto the plane. It was pretty great. But there was nothing really as such as an ordinary day in the office, even though I think my favorite days were the days when it was just he and I and a few other people working in the office. But of course, you always think of the black tie events and the special, witnessing special signatures, traveling special places. One of my favorite roles was being behind the lens of the camera. The man could not take a bad picture. He made me look like a great photographer. I was not. The only reason I got tabbed with being his photographer is one day when I was there as an intern, one of the gals was out of the office and they said, Peggy, can you take some pictures of this next appointment coming in? Sure. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, where's the camera manual? I got to read it. We'll just go with the auto settings and, you know, hope that works. But being that behind the lens of the camera, capturing him so many times. Most of the pictures in my book are pictures that I took, but he was an actor. He was handsome. You couldn't take a bad picture of him. And what I really loved about being the photographer is you think of these private meetings. Well, when everybody leaves, the photographer gets to stay. And so it was the ultimate role, being the fly on the wall, watching so many important and special meetings with President Reagan. Here he is taking Lady Margaret Thatcher all around the Reagan Library. And then after the event, I captured this funny picture. So the ladies are in their stocking feet. They've got their shoes kicked off. And Ronald Reagan, if you can see him, he's kind of got his eyes rolled back in the back of his head like, stop talking, ladies, so we can go home. I'm sure nobody in here can relate to that, but it's just this very real moment of real people who enjoyed each other's company, but at the end of a long night, it was time to go home. We think of him on the world stage, but if you know his life story, he came from humble beginnings. He was born in 1911 on the heels of the Great Depression. His family was very poor, but his mother raised him in a richness that he talks about in glowing ways. She taught him that God has a plan for everyone, and seemingly random twists of fate are all part of his plan, and in the end, everything will work out for the best. His was truly a great American story, an only in America story, where a little boy grows up in the heart of the heartland, in poverty, in a little dot on a map town. And if you looked at the cards of life he was dealt, you'd probably think, this poor kid doesn't have a chance. But his mom, and with her faith and her optimism, raised him to believe he could do and become anything that he wanted to. And so Caden mentioned it. I am working on a book right now about Ronald Reagan's mother, because he attributes to her being the most important person in his early life. And as a mom myself, I wonder what kind of woman raises a little boy to believe and become all he did. And so I'm looking forward to learning more about her story as I go along, and hopefully that'll come out in the next year or so. Reagan was a man of authenticity. I think this is why we loved him and related to him. What you saw was what you got. He loved to take people up to his ranch, which was not at the end of the 1800s, but he brought people like Margaret Thatcher up there, Gorbachev. There's a very funny story in my book about finding Gorbachev's hat and making sure it fit him. We think of him as a great communicator, but I think we also think of him as the great optimist. You think of the 1970s, and at the end of the 1970s, taxes were high, inflation was high, unemployment was high, and worst of all, American morale was incredibly low. Ronald Reagan takes office, and on day one, he changes the narrative entirely with his optimism and his words, and later, of course, with his policies. But he says it's morning in America. There's shining city on the hill. We all get to be part of it. America's best days are ahead. And so when you think of Reagan, you think of, yes, his communication, but you think of his optimism. And that optimism and the vision that he painted for a better and different America ahead was what inspired and invigorated all of us. And in fact, if you look at after his 8 years of his presidency, and you ask him what he thought was the most important part of his presidency or what he was most proud of, he said, "I made the American people believe in themselves again." It wasn't about him. It wasn't about his policies. He made us believe in ourselves again. And those of us who were fortunate enough to live through the 1980s remember that feeling of being proud of who we were as Americans, both domestically and on the world stage, shining the torch of freedom into dark places. And that was Reagan, and that was the optimism that was contagious to all of us. We, of course, think of him as a man of strength. He stood at the Berlin Wall and challenged Gorbachev to tear it down, and we know that wall came down. We think of him as a man of diplomacy, but diplomacy, Reagan's way, really looked a lot like friendship. It wasn't about the talking points, it was about the personal relationship. And so we all can do diplomacy Reagan's way by focusing on the people, by focusing on the relationships, and that was how he believed was the better way to get things done. Post-presidency, we saw this diplomacy in action. Gorbachev came to his post-presidency office. We had people like Lech Walesa from Poland, Helmut Kohl from Germany, Prime Minister Nakasone from Japan, Brian Mulroney, who was a dear friend of his from Canada. These people came after he was out of office, not because they had to for protocol or diplomatic reasons. They came because they liked him personally and they wanted the friendship that they had established during the presidency, and some even before Lady Thatcher. They became friends long before they were president and prime minister. They wanted that friendship to continue. Of course, we know Reagan's humor. You can look online for all the funny stories, and I will tell you, having witnessed him many times, he was the source of those jokes, those stories, that humor, and he loved to tell stories, and it was always very funny. And he didn't mind being the butt of his own joke. That self-deprecating humor would always break the ice, and he would often use that at the beginning of a meeting just to put people at ease. They could kind of roll their shoulders back and laugh and just really enjoy the moment and the time they had with him. He was a man of incredible respect. He didn't care if you were a Republican or a Democrat or anything about you. He cared about people and had respect for people of all walks of life and all viewpoints. And I always appreciated that about him. And it was funny, you would see sometimes people would come in and they thought they were really going to make their point with Ronald Reagan. And they would walk in, you know, kind of stern-faced. They're going to really tell Reagan something. And then they'd meet him, they'd shake his hand, and I used to say he would disarm with charm. And the next thing you knew, they were laughing and smiling and eating jelly beans. Thank you for putting those out today, Morton. But yeah, it was hard to make a point with Ronald Reagan because he showed such respect to other people that they, in turn, respected him. Of course, he respected women. He talks about Mrs. Reagan in such loving ways. His mother, of course, he was the first president to put a female on the Supreme Court and said he chose her because she was the best person for the job. Not just that she was a female, but he did know that it was time to put a woman on the Supreme Court, and he was always proud of that. And of course, Mother Teresa was this little tiny woman who was a giant on the world stage, and he had such respect for the work that she did on the streets of Calcutta and worldwide, bringing healing and faith to people all over the world. And Mrs. Reagan, his love story with her was fun to watch. The two of them together, it was very sincere, their love they had for each other. And of course, he was a man of patriotism, and you would expect that from a president, but I think Ronald Reagan bled red, white, and blue. He loved this country. He loved everything about this country, and he loved everyone in this country, whether we were from a big city or a dot town in the middle of the heartland. He loved this country and was so proud and honored to serve as president. He was a man of humility. He always kept a sign on his desk that said there's no limit to what a man can do or where he can go so long as he doesn't mind who gets the credit. That was the way he lived, not just a sign on his desk, and he expected those of us who worked around him to live and serve in that way as well. He was a man of incredible gratitude. Here he is getting the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Bush. And what I love is on our way home, we're flying home from DC back to California, he had that medal on and he wore it all the way home. You think of all the honors, all the awards, all the medals he's received over the years, but it still meant something to him. He had such a fondness and an appreciation for having had the opportunity to serve as your president and was proud of that and wore that medal all the way home. He was a man of incredible gratitude. He showed his gratitude to the people around him as well. This is one of my most treasured items. It is a doodle. He was known to be a doodler. I like to think maybe it's a self-portrait of Reagan. It's on his beautiful gold embossed Ronald Reagan stationery. And he gave this to me for Christmas one year. It says, "Merry Christmas to Peggy." He had Mrs. Reagan sign it, Nancy, and Ronald Reagan. And when he gave it to me, he was a little apologetic. He said, "You always do my shopping for me. So I wasn't sure what I could get for you without you being involved. And so I made this for you and I hope you like it." There's nothing that I could possibly treasure more because it was from his pen, from his heart. And at a time like Christmas, taking the time and the thought and the opportunity to show gratitude to the people around him. He was a man of incredible kindness. I had 3 of my 4 children while I was working there, and it was so fun to bring number 1, my son Taylor, to meet him and Mrs. Reagan. Number 2, my daughter Courtney. Number 3, my daughter Paige. We can, yeah, that's okay. And number 4, my daughter Jocelyn. At which point Mrs. Reagan pulled me aside and she said, "You know how this is happening, right?" 4 and no more, not a conversation I really wanted to have with the former First Lady, but 4 and no more. Oops. So my kids grew up with President and Mrs. Reagan, and what I love about kids is they don't care how much money you have or what your titles are, how important you are. My kids grew up knowing that the Reagans loved them and loved having them around, and I was always very nervous. Don't touch it, don't say the wrong thing, but the Reagans loved having the kids around, and they would play with the other kids in the office, and I'll be Secret Service, you be the First Lady, talking to their sleeve. But yeah, they loved growing up. And it was interesting, my daughter, when she went to college, they had to analyze a Reagan speech. And she said, "Mom, when I heard his voice again, it just made me feel safe." And I thought, how telling. And I think for those of us who were blessed enough to have him be our president, we felt safe when we heard his voice. We knew that this was a man who loved us, cared about us, and loved this country and would do anything for us. And I just thought that was really an interesting thing for her to say. I hear his voice and I feel safe. So everything I ever need to know and learn, I learned at the feet of this great man. He taught me not just with his words, but by his actions. And one of my takeaways is your legacy is not written after you're gone. It's written with every day of your life. And he showed me that by the way he interacted with people. We all should lead and live as if our legacy depends upon it, because it does. I was so blessed to witness incredibly powerful moments, like a little boy coming in with autism who was obsessed with Ronald Reagan, had memorized everything. And this wasn't a publicity stunt. It was Ronald Reagan meeting with this little boy and his family and having the little boy get a chance to ask questions and meet his hero in person. It was a beautiful moment. Ronald Reagan was writing his legacy with every day of his life. There was a former service member who had been shot down behind enemy lines and survived by eating bugs and leaves until he was rescued. And he came in to see President Reagan. And at the end of that meeting, they were standing at the front of his desk. And the young man said to President Reagan, "I know you're no longer my commander-in-chief, but I feel like I'd like to salute you. Would that be okay?" And Reagan said, "I'm not your commander-in-chief anymore, but I'd love to salute you back." And so these 2 men standing facing each other, saluting each other out of such respect. One had so much of life ahead of him, one had so much of life behind him. But Ronald Reagan was writing the legacy of his life with every day of his life. There's one moment above all others that I will always remember from being in that office. This woman had written into the office. She was from Romania. Little tiny woman, very hunched over with age and years and the hard life that she had had. She walked into the office and she took one look at Ronald Reagan and she fell to his feet. And she started sobbing and kissing his feet. He reached down and he brought her to stand, and with tears streaming down her face in her very broken English, she thanked him. She thanked him for freeing her family, for freeing her people from oppression. And I thought, how did this woman from Romania trace the dots of her freedom back to the feet of this great man? But I thought of all the people around the world, how many other people, had they had the same opportunity, would have done the exact same thing? He was writing the legacy of his life with every day of his life. When we would go out in public, you saw how people would respond to him and how he was connected to people. And when he passed away, we saw that deep personal connection that people had to him, how they lined the streets, how they stood and lined the roadways. These are people, for the most part, who had never met Ronald Reagan, but they loved him, appreciated him, and admired him, and were grateful for all the ways that he had helped and benefited their lives. I think that they appreciated him because they knew that he had always respected and appreciated them as the American people. I think we have a few minutes. I'll take a couple of quick questions, and then I'm happy to close. So. All right. And tell me your name, please.
Yeah. Ma'am, so nice to meet you. My name is Connor
Hi,
Clark.
Connor.
I'm with a small think tank called Unleash Prosperity. So I was born during the H.W. Bush presidency, and I'm wondering, because as I understand it, really from Mondale up through Cheney, the vice presidency was evolving a lot, and depending upon, who was in the presidency and vice presidency, they were leaning on each other in, different ways, and the vice president was involved in, decision making more or less. What did you see about Reagan's relationship with H.W. Bush, and did it, I guess to your knowledge, did it change over those 8 years and set precedents for future, relationships, and Gore, Clinton, Obama, Biden, who knows?
Yeah. Well, let me speak to his relationship. Thank you, Connor, for the question. His relationship with George Bush was really wonderful. They were truly deep friends. They appreciated and admired each other. And I'll tell you one quick story about when George Bush came as sitting president of the United States. So Ronald Reagan was the former president. Now George Bush is sitting president of the United States. And he comes to visit Ronald Reagan while he's there in his Century City office. So I remember standing with Ronald Reagan. We're looking out the window from the 34th floor, watching this entire presidential motorcade come down, I think it was Pico Boulevard. You think the president of the United States could have summoned Ronald Reagan to come see him at his hotel or someplace, but no. He gets in, and anybody who's seen a presidential motorcade, this is not an easy movement, comes all the way down to Century City, walks in, and when he gets to the floor of the office, he bursts out and he says, "Now, where's my president?" And I thought, wow, here's this man who's the sitting president of the United States and still sees Ronald Reagan in so many ways as his president. After George Bush passed away, I wrote an article, an op-ed called Ronald Reagan's Wingman. And so it was talking about their relationship. So I think that George Bush always loved and appreciated Ronald Reagan, and that was definitely mutually a respect. Thank you. Thank you, Connor.
I had a mother who passed away from Alzheimer's, and so watched that progression. And over that decade, maybe could you say a few words about any progression that you saw?
Yeah, I write about it in my book. I wanted to be revealing, but also respectful. And I do have a lot of people who have read my book who have dealt with this in their own families, and they kind of read between the lines. I never wanted to cross a line in revealing anything, but also I felt that President and Mrs. Reagan had always used their platform to help people. And so prior to Ronald Reagan, and I don't know how long ago your mother passed away, but prior to this, we didn't even know what Alzheimer's was. And I remember before you could Google, I know all the young people are like, well, why didn't you just Google it? you could not Google, and I went to a library and found one book that was called, I don't know, The 24-Hour Day or something like that, that was about kind of dementia and things like that. Now there's hundreds of books about Alzheimer's, and I really think that we have the Reagans to thank for that. They could have retreated to their ranch and just disappeared privately and let people speculate and write whatever about them, but they chose to use their platform in a very positive way to benefit others. And I think the fact that today that there's not as much shame or stigma attached with dementia and Alzheimer's is because the Reagans were willing to take something that was very personal and private and painful and be public with it. And so I always appreciate them for doing that. And that also gave me the feeling that, you know, if I can use what I experienced in dealing with that time with President Reagan for good in my platform, I'm going to do that the same way. One of the things I love, though, you think about Ronald Reagan, when he took office, at the time, he was the oldest president to have served. He was full throttle. He was all in. And at a time when most people are retiring and buying a motorhome and driving across the country, nothing wrong with that. But he stepped up to serve and take his most important and difficult job. And he really showed that we can live a totality of life. It doesn't have to end at 62 or 65 or whenever. Morton, wherever he is, a fantastic example of living a very full, long life, never taking your foot off the gas. And so I appreciated Reagan so much for that. And he taught me that there's so much of life that we can live long beyond the years that we think are our working years. Maybe two more, maybe.
Thank you, Peggy.
Oh, Martin, you're right behind me. I'm sorry. I was saying kind things to your empty chair. My apologies. I'll wrap it quickly. Thank you. You've got my back, Morton. Thank you. I've got yours too.
Thank you, Peggy. Peggy, I'm the director of the Advanced School of Politics here at the Leadership Institute. I always encourage everybody who's interested in leadership is to read biographies. So thank you for writing this, and I encourage you all to, because Reagan is worth studying. However, another book was written about Reagan, and this one I'm referring to is written by Max Boot. I don't know if you had a chance to read it.
I haven't read it yet.
It's quite critical, and I know Reagan wasn't a perfect person, but I wonder if you had some insight on some of his critics.
Yeah, you know, and I've read parts of some books that have been critical of Reagan, and of course nobody is perfect. He wasn't a saint. His mother that I'm writing about now was not a saint, even though some people make her out to be. Criticism is fair, and I think the totality of your life, if you kick the tires, they hold air. When you look at the sum of his life, when you look at the legacy of his policies and what he left behind, that's what tells the story. And people have a chance to be critical, of course. We can all say that. But I find it interesting sometimes, especially, and I won't even name the book and the author, but sometimes people miss the beauty of Ronald Reagan. There was this beautiful transparency, this simplicity without being simple to him. And sometimes people missed it because they thought there had to be more to him. They had to be calculating. He had to be maneuvering for himself. He couldn't really just be so true to his faith, to this country, to serving others. And so I think sometimes people miss it because they try to make him into something that he's not, or give attributes to him that are really negative, when actually, Ronald Reagan, through and through, from my experience, sitting at his side for 10, almost 15 years, what you saw was what you got. There was no secret motive. And there's a lot of people that I think from their own personal experience know that somebody couldn't possibly be that good and that pure. But I think Ronald Reagan actually was. Maybe one last one, and then I'll wrap. Is that okay?
One last question.
Last one.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. My name is Maria Pickering. I'm a history nut from Washington, D.C., and I'm looking forward to your book about Reagan's mother. Can you please give us a sneak preview and tell us some of the characteristics of her personality that you think formed him into the man that he became?
Yeah, I'm early in my research, but it's interesting because the truth always comes out when you're put on the spot. And so I was speaking at an event many years ago, and somebody said, "You've met all these amazing people. Who did you not meet that you wish you would have met?" And without even thinking of it, I said, Ronald Reagan's mother. Because what kind of woman raises a little boy in those circumstances to do and become all that she did? And it's interesting, I know the end of Reagan's life so well. It will be part biography, but I want to tell more than just her story, because her story didn't end when she died. Her story continued on through him, and we see her fingerprints of his life through his optimism, his faith, the way he talked about and loved this country long after she was gone. And so that's the totality of the story that I'm going to tell, not just her biography. But all right, Morton, can I end with a Reagan quote? Because
I just want everybody to give you a well-deserved applause at this point. Thank you. Peggy, it is our custom here to give presents to our Wakeup Club speakers. As I'm sure you know, the Ronald Reagan neckties and during the Reagan administration, the club tie of the Reaganites in the White House was Adam Smith ties, and also their ladies' scarves, Adam Smith scarves, and so I want to present you that. It's currently the club tie of the Reagan Alumni Association.
thank you, Morton. I really appreciate
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank very much the people who deserve the credit for the success of the Leadership Institute, and that is the generous donors of the Leadership Institute. We would not have this building or the programs that we have without the generous support of our donors. I invite you to join us on Wednesday, March the 4th for our Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast. Happy to have you back here. Zoe Dockery, will you please step up here? Zoe will be delighted to give anyone interested in a tour after this breakfast of our Stephen P.J. Wood building and our two adjacent floors in the adjacent building. Zoe will do a great job, give you a great tour. She'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. And if it happens that she can't answer a tough question you ask, she may pop up to my office and ask me. Thank you all for a wonderful breakfast, and look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you very much. Zoe.